Good afternoon, sir. It's very nice to meet you here, and it's such an honor to have this interview with you. Based on your experience so far, how would you value the whole work of the Szeged Science Academy?
I think it's a very good program. And from what I have seen in these 2 days, I see a lot of very clever, very motivated students. It's really a joy to see all these people who are in their last year in school coming here, meeting real scientists, being made enthusiastic about science, being able to interact with them even in laboratories, as I saw this morning. And I think you are generating here a program where you are making a lot of young people enthusiastic about science, and many of them I think will probably go into science. But even those who ultimately may decide for a different career will have experienced some real science, and they will nevertheless disseminate a kind of general information about science in the population, which also is important because the whole population needs to be made more knowledgeable about science. After all, science is driving our whole society. So I see there's a very really pioneering program which does not exist in most countries, and I think it's a real service to the community and also to science. So I think this has grown, as I understand it, from small start, and now it involves something like 1,000 undergraduate students, school leavers who come here. And of course for Szeged itself it's a great thing, because many of these people will come to Szeged University as students, and that's a great strength again for Szeged to have been pioneering this initiative.
What do you think? What are the main strengths of this program, and could it be improved even more? And if so, in which areas?
I think the main strength is the basic idea of selecting via good teachers the most talented students in the last years, then bringing them all together, as I understand, twice a year, and then introducing them to work with a real scientist, giving some kind of inspiration by inviting people from outside Hungary to come and talk to them and interact with them. That, I think, is the principal strength of the program. So it depends, of course, on this very close collaboration between the people who are leading the program and the schools. And I think you have created a network of very good schools which now have laboratories, and actually also in this way. And I met some of the teachers here from the schools who are really very impressive people, actually very knowledgeable. And the other element, actually, which is very good about the program is the emphasis on speaking English, because again, this is the international language of science. And by insisting that all the students come here, that they actually engage in the English language is I think, both an important signposting and also an important real achievement. And some of the students I met here, their English is really incredibly good, and so that's also good. Nothing is ever so good that it cannot be improved, I guess, so one can always think about some other elements to add to it. But of course, I mean, a 2-day meeting is a short time, and so if you do more in one area, there will be less time for other things, and one can have a discussion about exactly the kind of optimization of the program, and it also has to be sort of a bit entertaining and interesting for the students, and they also have to have some time to interact with each other. So there are very many different things. As always, every kind of meeting is always a kind of optimization exercise. How do you use the time most efficiently and in the best way, but at the same time creating a kind of enjoyable experience. So I would say the program is pretty good as it is. One can, as I say, discuss some details about whether there are certain elements that could be introduced in the program and others could be less time. But these are tiny things, actually, which I think any kind of program will continuously evaluate itself. And I don't actually know, this is something I should ask Peter Heggie, whether you have any kind of evaluation from the students and from the school leavers themselves. whether you afterwards ask them kind of structured questions about what was good, what was less good, and so on. If that happens, that's good. If that, then it's good actually, because obviously that's also an important element to take into account. What was their experience of the course, and do they have suggestions for how things could be improved? One should never be complacent. But it isn't a pioneering program, as far as I know. I don't know any other country which does exactly this. There are some bits of it that you can see in some other countries, but this program is quite comprehensive, and I think Hungary has to be congratulated to have created this, or Szeged, which has created this program.
That would have been my next question. I know, as far as I know, you're Danish, but you live in the UK, actually Wales. So you've got pretty good vision about the talents program in different countries. What are the differences? Is there any in these three countries especially? Do you know any?
Well, I guess there are differences in the school structure. So there is Danish and Hungarian probably are more similar type of broad school education. The British school education, particularly the English school education, is much more focused on certain subjects. So for the last 2 years in England, people basically only take 3 subjects. So it's quite specialized in that sense, whereas the continental European model has small variations, but basically similar, rather broad-based, although maybe with some emphasis on some subjects. And again, one can argue, and again, university education, of course, in Britain is very short compared to continental Europe. I mean, a typical degree course in the UK is 3 years only, whereas typically in other continental European countries, maybe 4, 5, 6 years or something like that. So the specialization has the advantage that you get to a certain level in the subject relatively early, which means that the university course can be shorter. Yes. On the other hand, it means a quite early specialization where maybe too many other options are excluded. So again, there are advantages and disadvantages, and you can argue about which one is a better system. But so there are significant differences in this respect. It means in certain subject areas, like the life sciences, the UK has traditionally done very well. And the one advantage is that people get into doing real science quite a bit earlier than you do in continental Europe. So typically a British graduate will be 21 when they graduate, then they will do only a 3 or 4 year PhD. So at 24 or something like that, they will do already full-time research. Whereas typically in continental Europe, it will be late 20s before you get to that stage. So there is that difference. In some areas maybe where you need a more fundamental education, like in physics and chemistry, maybe the European system is better. In the life sciences, where up to now things have been a bit more intuitive and so on, maybe then people coming to the science earlier has some degree advantage, but that subject area also may be changing, and so it's a very fluid word. So it's difficult actually to be sure about which system is better. And another complication is that science has become very international, so that people are moving around afterwards. So it's actually quite difficult to evaluate whether one country is doing better than another one, because in all countries the science is very international. There are lots of people from different countries working in the same institutes. And so it would be a very difficult task actually to answer the question of which system works better than the other one.
Yeah, I do agree. I think both, well, these type of education system both has advantages and disadvantages as well. So I agree completely with you. I believe you are a very busy man and traveling a lot. Why did you accept the invitation, especially for this conference this year?
Well, I think in general, in terms of accepting invitations, a lot of it depends on personal contacts, quite frankly. So, of course, I've known Peter Hegge for many years. We work a little bit in a very similar area and collaborations, and so there's a kind of personal friendship there. So when he invites me, I would generally, if I can do it, I would say yes, actually. So.
Have you been in this conference before?
I've not been in this particular program directly before, but I have been here many times in Szeged. Peter Hegge, as you probably all know, is a tremendous organizer and organizes many different events and many different conferences. So I have been to Szeged many times and to Budapest many times also. I've also been to Pécs. So I have come to Hungary quite frequently over the years, and I like coming here. And of course there's also a little bit of a personal connection, since my mother was Hungarian, and so I have a kind of, although I don't speak Hungarian, unfortunately, otherwise we could have had the interview in Hungarian, but there is a family connection in that sense. So I guess genetically I am half Hungarian, so there is the connection also. This also influences you a little bit. So generally speaking, I look positively at invitations from Hungary because there is this kind of contact.
I see. I've got one more question to ask. What do you think, how tough, how difficult for young researcher, ambitious researchers, scientists to actually do what they want to in Hungary or in all over the country? Is it difficult to start their career as a scientist, or?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think in my lifetime the start for a young scientist has become more difficult, much more difficult than it was when I started out. I think the competition, the international competition is very strong, and it's really difficult for a young person to become an independent researcher quite early on. And I think we are running a little bit the danger. That's general, actually. It's not specific for Hungary or for any country, actually. It's a worldwide tendency that compared to when I started out, when I became an independent researcher very early in my life, nowadays you had to be a postdoc for many years in sometimes several postdocs in different groups before you finally, if you succeed, get a kind of independent position, and when you can finally try to realize your own personal ideas. And actually in the US it is even worse actually now, because the average age, I was at a meeting in Washington recently, and I was told that the average age in the US where a person now gets his or her first grant, people are 40 years. Wow. So that's really changed in my lifetime. Previously, there were a lot of younger people who got their first major grants. So that's actually even worse than in Europe. In Europe, we have some very good programs. For example, the European Research Council have the starting grantor scheme, which I think is very impressive. Of course, the competition is very strong to get these grants. But if, as a young researcher, you get a starting grant from the RC, you have got quite a good funding for typically 4 years or something like that. You become very independent because you have a lot of grant money, the institution really appreciates you, and you are basically an independent person at that point. But of course it's only a very small number of people who get such a great opportunity. So the competition is very great, and I think for some people it becomes a bit of a deterrent, the difficulties of getting grants. I was just talking to the group of students before of these challenges, and it can be a disincentive for a young person who may have their own individual ideas, and then to realize that it will actually be many, many years before they can do exactly what they want. Up to that point, they have to do what some supervisor tells them should be the project. It can still be very enjoyable, very interesting. But I think we are losing potentially some good people in Europe. We still have a better system than in the US, I think. But there is a danger that we have created a system which is too super competitive and where we are giving too few opportunities to young, really excellent scientists to actually just do what they want and what they think they would like to do. So that's an important question for all funding bodies, actually, to think about this particular point. And because the scientific enterprise has grown so enormously in recent years, the competitive ground situation has become much more serious than there was before. So in most countries, the success rates for getting grants from major funding bodies is quite low. And in US it's even lower, actually. In some expanding country like China, actually the funding opportunities are much better now. So younger people can actually get more funding. So we have to be careful that we are not creating a system that is so super competitive that we may lose some of our best talent who will feel that actually maybe this is not the right thing to do, because you're just fighting against a lot of different odds. And you know, science is a very strange enterprise now, which many people outside science don't appreciate. I mean, most jobs you get in this world are jobs where when you get a job, you also got the tools to do your job. But in science it's not like that. You get a job in the university and you got to find the money yourself to do the science that you are supposed to be appointed to do. And the competition is such that many people actually have difficulties getting the money that they need to do. So we are having a slightly wasteful enterprise, where some people in many universities in Europe are employed, but they actually cannot utilize their talents completely because there's just no money available to them. So I think funding bodies also have a duty to think carefully about whether they are always doing the right thing.
I've got one more quick question. How do you find the students that you met before? And is there any advice that you would give them?
Well, one specific advice I gave the students just now actually was that they have to promise themselves to always ask questions when they are at a meeting and conference, because there are a few of them who are very active, and these are the ones you interact with, and they are very good. But there are many other students who are sitting there and you don't hear their voices, and I sort of advise them, promise yourself when you go to any kind of conference and meeting, today you will ask at least one question. And you promise yourself and you do it, because that's an important way of, in a way, manifesting your own personality. And also you remember better the event when you actually ask some questions. So that, I think, is very good advice, which I would give to students and always do, because that actually is one thing where the US is different from Europe. In US, they are not so afraid of asking questions. When you give a lecture in the US, they are quite uninhibited, maybe sometimes stupid questions, but they are not afraid of asking. And in Europe, we have a different culture where many people feel a little bit inhibited and say, oh, maybe it's a stupid question, maybe it's better to not ask the question. And so I advise people, ask questions, because you always learn something from it.
I do agree. Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.